I was standing in the hallway when I heard her laughing. Her voice, which I once adored, now sounded like a knife on glass. "He doesn't even suspect," she said. "I've arranged everything so that he'll be left with nothing." In that moment, I realized, no amount of talking would help. I still remember the day Ashley and I found this house. 5 years ago, we stood on the porch, her eyes gleaming with possibility as the realtor handed us the keys. The two-story colonial in Westlake Village wasn't just a home, it was the foundation for our future. The spacious kitchen where we'd host Thanksgiving dinners. The backyard where our kids would play. The master bedroom where we'd grow old together. "This is it, Michael," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "Everything we've worked for." I believed her. I believed in us. That was my first mistake. We'd met at a networking event in Los Angeles 3 years earlier. I was launching my software security company, struggling to find investors who believed in my vision. Ashley approached me after my pitch, business card extended between manicured fingers. "Your cybersecurity concept has potential," she said, her blue eyes analytical and sharp. "But your financial projections need work." She was a financial consultant, specializing in startups. Within months, she'd restructured my business model, connected me with serious investors, and moved into my apartment. We were the perfect team. I handled the technical side, she managed the money. When Blue Shield Security finally took off, it felt like our success, not just mine. The first year in our new house was everything I'd dreamed of. I worked 12-hour days, building the company from 5 employees to 25. Ashley decorated our home with elegant, expensive furniture and hosted dinner parties for potential clients. On weekends, we'd discuss expansion plans over coffee on the patio. I was exhausted but fulfilled, watching our bank account grow along with our dreams. "You need to focus on development," Ashley suggested one evening, massaging my shoulders as I reviewed code. "Let me handle the financial side completely. You're spreading yourself too thin." She made sense. I was a programmer at heart, not an accountant. I signed the papers she prepared, authorizing her to manage company expenses and our joint accounts. "You won't regret this," she promised, kissing my cheek. "Trust me." I did. Completely. That was my second mistake. The changes were subtle at first. A designer handbag here. A weekend trip to Palm Springs there. Nothing outrageous, but small luxuries that seemed to multiply. Meanwhile, I wore the same 3 shirts and ate lunch at my desk. "The business is doing well," she'd say when I mentioned an unusual expense. "We deserve to enjoy some of it." 13 months after moving in, I noticed discrepancies in our accounts. Small transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. When confronted, Ashley's explanation seemed reasonable. "It's for tax purposes, Michael. We need to diversify how we hold assets. You'd be surprised how much we've saved." I wanted to believe her. So I did. That was my third mistake. Then came the delayed payments to vendors. The worried calls from our accountant. The gradual restriction of my access to our financial records. "You're stressing over nothing," Ashley would assure me. "Remember when you almost tanked the Johnson contract by overthinking? This is why you handle the tech, and I handle the money." She'd bring up my past mistakes whenever I questioned her, subtly undermining my confidence. Each time, I'd back down, remembering how her financial expertise had saved me before. At night, I'd watch her sleeping beside me, wondering when the woman who believed in my dreams had become someone I barely recognized. But then morning would come, she'd kiss me before heading to her home office, and I'd convince myself I was being paranoid. Until the day I wasn't. I hadn't planned to visit First National that Tuesday. An unexpected meeting with a potential investor downtown put me just blocks from our bank. On impulse, I decided to discuss a business loan for expanding our server capacity. Mr. Wagner, the manager, greeted me warmly. It's been a while since we've seen you. Usually, your wife handles everything. We chatted briefly about interest rates before he pulled up my accounts. Just to confirm, you want this loan to be structured like the previous ones? Under Mrs. Wagner's controlling interest. My smile remained fixed while my stomach twisted. Could you show me the paperwork on those previous loans? His expression changed slightly as he retrieved the files. Of course. Though I assumed since you signed the power of attorney, you were aware of the arrangements. Power of attorney. The words hit like a physical blow. The document he showed me bore my signature. Except it wasn't my signature, not exactly. It was close enough to fool someone who didn't write it, with the same distinctive loop in the W of Wagner. A practiced forgery. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I kissed her cheek, complained about a difficult client, and retreated to my home office. While she watched her favorite reality show downstairs, I began investigating our financial life with the same methodical attention I gave to debugging complex code. What I found made me physically ill. 3 offshore accounts in her name only. A second mortgage on our house that I'd never known about. Nearly $800,000 transferred from company accounts over the past 6 months. A separate LLC registered solely in her name that now owned the patents to my software innovations. I stayed up all night, cataloging each betrayal in meticulous detail, each discovery another nail in the coffin of our marriage. By morning, I knew Ashley wasn't just stealing from me. She was systematically erasing me from my own life. Still, I needed to understand why. Was there someone else? Had I failed her somehow? I needed to hear the truth from her lips. That opportunity came sooner than expected. The following evening, I returned home early after canceling my last meeting. Ashley's car was in the driveway, but she didn't answer when I called her name. I found her upstairs in our bedroom, pacing by the window, her phone pressed to her ear. I paused in the hallway, her voice drifting through the partially open door. He doesn't even suspect, she laughed, the sound brittle and cold. I've arranged everything so that he'll be left with nothing. A pause as the person on the other end spoke. No, David, you don't understand how perfect this is. The company's already functionally mine. The house will be next. He'll be completely blindsided when I file the papers next week. Another pause. Of course I feel something, relief. 5 years playing the supportive wife to that workaholic nerd. Do you know how boring it's been, listening to him talk about encryption protocols? At least his stupid security obsession made him easy to fool. He trusted me so completely he never checked what he was signing. Her voice softened, became intimate. We'll have everything, baby. His money, his company, his house. He'll be back in that crappy apartment where I found him, while we're living the life he paid for. In that moment, I realized, no amount of talking would help. No explanation would make sense of this betrayal. The Ashley I loved had never existed. I retreated silently down the hall, my mind strangely calm. 5 years of memories recategorized themselves. Every late night at the office. Every business trip without me. Every document she'd had me sign while distracted or exhausted. I'd been played by a master. But she'd made one critical miscalculation. She thought I was still the naive programmer she'd met at that networking event. She'd forgotten that I'd built a security company by thinking 10 steps ahead, by anticipating vulnerabilities and planning for worst-case scenarios. She'd forgotten what I did for a living. I drove to a hotel and checked in under a false name, a precaution that now seemed darkly appropriate. In the sterile quiet of the room, I opened my laptop and began to work. By morning, I had a plan. First, I called James Peterson, a corporate attorney I'd met through a cybersecurity conference. I explained my situation clinically, without emotion, as if describing a theoretical security breach. Jesus, Michael, he said when I finished. This is systematic fraud. We need to move quickly. Next came Sarah Delgado, a forensic accountant who specialized in financial crimes. Her whistle pierced through the phone when she reviewed the documents I'd forwarded. "She's good," Sarah admitted. "But she left trails. Always do, these types." Over the next 3 days, I executed my countermeasures with surgical precision. Step 1, I created a backup company. Using a trusted developer as a frontman, I transferred all intellectual property not yet stolen to a new entity. The code, the client relationships, the pending contracts, everything that made Blue Shield valuable. Step 2, I contacted the IRS and SEC, anonymously reporting suspicious financial activities at Blue Shield Security. I made sure the paper trail led directly to Ashley's carefully hidden accounts and the forged documents bearing my signature. Step 3, I withdrew from our remaining legitimate accounts, leaving exactly $13.57, the amount in my checking account when I'd met Ashley all those years ago. Step 4, I contacted our mortgage lender, informing them of potential fraud and requesting a freeze on any transactions related to our property. Throughout it all, I maintained perfect normalcy with Ashley. I returned home each night, kissed her cheek, and asked about her day. I nodded sympathetically when she mentioned cash flow issues at the company. I even brought her favorite takeout on Thursday night, watching her eat pad thai while knowing her entire world would collapse before the weekend. The final piece came together on Friday morning, when I received confirmation that all my preparations were in place. I texted Ashley that I'd be working late, then drove home at noon, timing my arrival for when I knew she'd be at her weekly salon appointment. I packed methodically: clothes, important documents, irreplaceable photos from my childhood. Nothing that we'd acquired together. Nothing that reminded me of her. I left my wedding ring on the nightstand. As I loaded my car, Mrs. Fitzgerald from next door waved from her garden. "Going somewhere, Michael?" I smiled politely. "Just a business trip." "Have a good weekend, Elaine." It wasn't exactly a lie. Where I was going was, indeed, my business alone. I was checking into another hotel when my phone exploded with notifications. Ashley had called 7 times in the past 20 minutes. Texts poured in, each more frantic than the last. "Michael, call me now. Something's happening with the accounts. Why can't I access the company server? Where are you?" I silenced my phone and ordered room service. The club sandwich tasted better than anything I'd eaten in months. At precisely 7:30 p.m., I drove back to our house, no, her house now. Or rather, the bank's house. I parked across the street, watching as Ashley paced in the living room, phone pressed to her ear, gesticulating wildly. Even from a distance, I could see her mascara had run, leaving black streaks down her perfect cheeks. I waited until she moved away from the window, then approached the front door. I still had my key, though I wouldn't need it much longer. She was in the kitchen when I entered, surrounded by papers spread across the granite island we'd chosen together. Her head snapped up at the sound of my footsteps, her expression cycling rapidly through relief, anger, and calculation. "Michael. Thank God." She stepped toward me, arms outstretched, tears welling in those beautiful, lying eyes. "Something terrible is happening. The accounts are frozen. The company server's locked. I've been trying to reach you all day." I remained just beyond her reach. "Have you really?" Something in my tone made her freeze. Her arms lowered slowly as she studied my face. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice suddenly careful. "I think you know, Ashley. Or should I call you by your maiden name? Since we never actually filed those marriage papers you told me about." Her face paled. "What are you talking about?" I smiled and pulled a chair from the kitchen table, sitting down comfortably. "Please, let's not do this. I heard your conversation with David. I've seen the accounts. I know about the power of attorney. The forgeries. The offshore transfers. All of it. For an instant, fear flashed across her features. Then, remarkably, she regained her composure, a small smile playing at her lips. "And what exactly do you think you can do?" "Everything's in my name now. The company, the intellectual property, this house, legally, it's all mine." "You signed it away." "Did I?" I tilted my head. "That's interesting. Because according to the documents I filed this morning, most of those signatures were forgeries. The FBI is particularly interested in the interstate nature of your fraud. That makes it federal, you know." Her smile faltered. "You're bluffing." "Let's see." I checked my watch. By now, the SEC has frozen all Blue Shield assets pending investigation. The IRS has flagged your personal accounts. And that shell company you created to hold the patents? Its registration has been challenged due to fraudulent documentation. She staggered slightly, grasping the island for support. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, I can. I'm particularly good with digital forensics, remember? It's literally what our company does." I emphasized the "our" with gentle mockery. "Every document you've created, every account you've accessed, every dollar you've moved, I have records of all of it." Her face hardened. "Fine. We'll let the lawyers sort it out. In the meantime, get out of my house." I couldn't help but laugh. "Your house? Check your email, Ashley. The mortgage lender has initiated foreclosure proceedings. Apparently, someone hasn't been making payments for 3 months, despite withdrawing the funds from our joint account." Her composure cracked entirely. She lunged for her phone, frantically scrolling through emails. I watched calmly as comprehension dawned on her face. "You," she whispered. "You set me up." "No, Ashley. I protected myself. There's a difference." I stood up, straightening my jacket. "I learned from the best, after all." She launched herself at me then, all calculated charm replaced by raw fury. "You think you're so clever? I still have enough to start over. I'll be fine." I caught her wrists easily, holding her at bay. "The money you stole, you mean?" Interesting thing about stolen funds, banks can reclaim them when fraud is proven. And it will be proven, Ashley. I've made sure of that. The fight drained from her suddenly. She collapsed into a kitchen chair, her perfect facade finally shattered. For a moment, I saw glimpses of the woman I thought I'd married, vulnerable, human, lost. "Why?" I asked quietly. "Was it always about the money? Was any of it real?" She looked up, her eyes red but suddenly clear. "It became real, sometimes. That's the truth. There were moments when I forgot it was a job, when I actually loved you. But not enough." She shrugged, a gesture so casual it broke something final inside me. "Love doesn't pay for the life I want." I nodded, absorbing this last truth. "There's $13.57 in our joint checking account. I left it for you. It's what I had when we met." I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. Behind me, sitting in our kitchen, no, not ours, never really ours, was a stranger wearing my wife's face. "Goodbye, Ashley." Outside, the California evening was warm, stars just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. I drove away without looking back, feeling neither the vindication nor satisfaction I'd expected. Just an empty hollowness where 5 years of my life had been. 3 months later, as I sat in the office of my new company, reviewing security protocols with a team I could actually trust, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Local woman indicted in major fraud case. Her mugshot showed a face I barely recognized, haggard, defeated, eyes vacant. The article detailed charges that could bring 20 years in federal prison. I closed the browser and returned to my work. Some betrayals can never be undone. Some trust, once broken, leaves only wreckage behind. But from wreckage, new foundations can be built, stronger, wiser, more carefully guarded. I would never make the same mistake again. That, at least, was something Ashley had taught me well.